Welcome to the Horsemanship and Practice podcast, the podcast where I get to talk to equine professionals, pick their brains and satisfy my curiosity. I'm your host Damien McNichol, and in this episode my guest is Dr. Russell MacKechnie-Guire. Russell is the founder of Centaur Biomechanics. He holds a PhD in equine biomechanics from the Royal Veterinary College. He is an associate professor at Hartpury University and has conducted extensive research into the effects that tack and rider have on equine movement, health and performance. He's also a consultant to the British Equestrian Federation's World Class Programme, a member of Team Great Britain's Scientific Advisory Group, a BHSI qualified coach and a Pilates and human biomechanics instructor. In this conversation we talk about Russell's journey into horses and equine research, before exploring how horses move, the factors that can influence their balance and symmetry, and what riders and trainers can learn from the science of equine biomechanics. I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, so today we are joined by Russell MacKechnie-Guire. That is how you say McKechnie, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, I was trying to get that right. He is the owner of Centaur Biomechanics. So Russell has a PhD in equine biomechanics. He's done extensive research into the effect that tack and rider has on equine health and performance. He collaborates with researchers all around the world. He's a consultant for Team GB and the British Equestrian Federation World Class. He sits in the Society of Master Saddlers Scientific Advisory Group. He's a Pilates instructor. He's an intrinsic biomechanics trainer for humans. He's a BHSI coach, and he competes in dressage and show jumping. So that is a seriously impressive biography, Russell. So I'd like to just start by sort of getting to know your story a little bit. I mean, you're obviously an academic.
Mm-hmm.
But I also get the feeling that your academia is driven by the practical side of things. So you've gone through your BHS training and everything like that. So you're also relatively handy with the horse, I would assume.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, thank you for having me on to your podcast. And I think if we circle right back to the very beginning of really my love for the horses, and I am an academic, but I have extreme dyslexia. And when I was younger, at 9, I couldn't read or write, really extreme dyslexia.
No way.
To the point where I had to go to a special school. I call it a special school because it only had 50 students and it was purely for dyslexic students at that time. And my family had to relocate to a different part of the country to facilitate this. So, it was really extreme. And with that comes, other challenges that I'm sure some of your listeners will resonate with bullying, and the names, you're thick, you're stupid, and all of that I was, to the extent where I was pushed off a moving train. So it was really, it was really quite extreme. And anyway, I'll come back to that later. But that took me to horses. And I remember going for a riding lesson when I was so young, about, say, 9 or 10. And we went to the riding school, and there was this, to me, I see her now, this beautiful, big, buxom grey horse, dapple grey horse named Polly. I'm sure she was a Shetland because, the height differences to now. But I remember her being enormous. And I remember being given a purple body brush in my right hand. And they said, just go and groom her. And I was like, groom her? We had dogs, so I assumed brush her.
Yeah.
So off I go, and they're in lined up as they were then, and I just started grooming her as it is, and I just loved it, absolutely loved it, and I felt so, it's such a cliche, but I felt so comfortable and safe with the horses at that time, coming from a period where I was really struggling with education, and the bullying. So anyway, so that progressed, and I got on to ride Polly. which at the time I perhaps thought was a good idea. But anyway, I got on one lap round the arena. I fell off and I thought,
Oh,
oh, that wasn't so much fun. But then I got back on. And really that started my love story with horses. And I have never looked back. And so to come back to your question, I am an academic, definitely. But I feel that I'm really fortunate with the practical application of what I do. And that really is that, um, you know, I want to be able to translate what we do in science to horses. So right back to that day one when I met Polly, I've stayed with horses, I've worked with horses, I've competed horses, trained horses all the way through. So yes, I'm very much a practical, applied researcher, and that's definitely my North Star, should we say.
yeah, that's
Sorry, that's a
brilliant.
very long answer to, to
No,
your
it's great.
question.
I'm sorry to hear about the bullying. That's kids are just unbelievably cruel, aren't they? Um,
Yeah, they are. But I have to say, I think I'm 44 now, so I'm not sure of your age, but we maybe are of a similar generation where smartphones weren't around then. So I think the bullying that there is now is completely different.
yeah, it
But
follows you home, doesn't it?
it does, it does.
Yeah,
But I have to say, I actually call it my super strength because it taught me all sorts of things at the time, not necessarily, but looking back,
yeah.
definitely. Look, I love being dyslexic and different because it makes me think differently. But at the time, you didn't know that then.
No,
But
no,
now
of
I
course.
do.
So just on the dyslexia then,
Yeah.
because obviously you don't become undyslexic, do you? So how do
Mm.
you work
Hmm.
in terms of doing your own research and your
Yeah.
writing?
Well, good question. So, I really must give credit to it's the old rectory school in Brettonham. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, which is just so disappointing. But anyway, they really were fantastic in, I think, first of all, it's giving people confidence, and that's the key thing is having confidence that you do
Hmm.
think differently. But that's okay. And when I was, as I say, younger, dyslexia really was not okay. It wasn't a thing that was as it is. We judge things then as we see things now, and dyslexia, is so part of normal life. But going back 30 odd years, it was like, oh gosh, this is odd.
Yeah,
So the school definitely got me on a level playing field, should we say. And then through my professional career, I guess what I've managed to do is develop various strategies that facilitate me to do what I do now. And I think that's probably my biggest bit of my own learning is I've got hundreds of what may take someone 5 minutes to do would probably take me an hour to do because I have various strategies, as I say, to do the task. But with that, I've layered on other strategies to check the task. So obviously, being in my position with science, let's just use an example. Process data. I'll always process data 3 times just to sense check the process and that there's been no errors.
yeah,
And then as part of the strategy is, my colleagues will help me and also sense check data. Or if it's an area that I think that's outside my will set, I'll pass it on to a colleague to do. So working as a team is also a big part for me. But just day to day life, it's definitely strategies. I know what
yeah.
works for me. It may not work for someone else. And I just live by those principles, I guess.
That's great. So we can be pretty sure that anything you bring out in terms of research or lectures or anything like that there, you're you're as sure as you could possibly be that it is correct because you've gone over it at least 3 times before you've even um,
Yeah,
attempted to put it out there.
yeah, absolutely, and we 100% certainty. The other thing is, within my world, as I mentioned a moment ago, it really is a team. So there's a team approach to anything that you do. You do, and that is great. So it's not just whatever, let's use the example, whatever I put out isn't just my work. It's, it's a accumulation of a group of people that have put together the study and the data and the processing. And I think that's possibly why I've ended up where I've ended up, is that is a team decision. It's a collaborative approach.
Yeah, of course.
And so yes, absolutely. Things that go out have been sense checked, ratified by me multiple times, but also by a group of people as well, that have the shared commitment and vision to producing high quality work.
This is it. There's something to be said for the scientific method, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think on that note, the science definitely suits people that think differently.
Yes.
In the context of just, like OCD and that, like, I love being OCD about things because it makes you really pedantic about stuff. And I think to do science well, you've got to be so pedantic and, specific, in doing that, taking shortcuts or it'll be fine does not sit well with someone who's in science and has a diverse way of thinking. So yeah, I think that's probably why I've ended up where I have.
And so do you take that type of thinking into every aspect of your life, or are you able to kind of leave it for your work?
I think you should ask my other half that and see what he says.
So it's a definite yes then.
It's an absolute yes. And, I don't want to say it can become tiresome because it's just natural for me. But I think it could probably become tiresome for those that I'm around. Again, you surround. One thing I learned in my world is surround yourself by great people that are supportive of you, that are critically challenge you constructively. And I have an amazing group around me of professional colleagues and also, friends. And they just let me be, from my perspective, let me be me. And they're like, oh, that's just Russell, just go with it. He's counting, sometimes when we're on holiday, when we go on holiday, I tend to like crash, burn out for the first few days and, no one sees me. I'm just on the lounger. And then by day 4, I'm like, right, what are we going to do? And they're all still sunbathing. So I just can't start counting the bricks or something on the building. And I'll say to Eric, like, oh, there's 204 bricks, don't you? And he's like, yes, what? So yes, it does follow through, but hey, we are what we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started learning to ride at a riding school. So when did that progress to something more serious?
Well, as I say, Polly was my first, the horse I remember fondly at the riding school. And I think my family are not riders. We are not an equestrian family at all. I am very much an anomaly.
Same with me.
So I was that. I hope what I hope is still the case. I was that typical child that was so desperate to have, a pony or a horse, it might have been. And, I had pictures all over my bedroom wall of horses. I think it was the Horse and Pony magazine and Pony magazine at the time. I used to beg my parents, please let me go and get this magazine. And I used to pull out the pictures of, like, say, up on the wall, up on the ceiling. It was just, it was just my world. And I used to ride my bicycle around our drive area and with my crash hat on and my schooling still trying to practice. I was obsessed with it. And so I definitely was putting pressure on my parents. I think, could we have a pony? Can we have a pony? And, it was definite, a no. My family, as I say, are not horsey. And at the time were very much working in the city of London.
It's
I think,
hard place to keep a pony.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, so that was 9. Then we relocated, I say, for the special school. And then I think it started we had the option because we'd relocated to possibly have a pony. And then I think dancer came into my world, I think at around 13, 14.
That's a solid
And
pony name there, dancer.
yeah, and there's a story too. And so Dancer arrived, and that was probably the start of my journey of owning or caring solely for a horse.
Mhm.
I say horse, I think she might have been a big pony, but like I say, when your height relationship, you think they're bigger. Now I look back and she probably wasn't the big horse. So yes, about 14, I think Dancer appeared.
Okay. It's an interesting transition, isn't it? Because I certainly come across people who are recently first time horse owners, and they've maybe been at a riding school for a few years and decided to get a horse. It's a big step up. There's a lot of learning to be done, isn't there?
There is, and I look, I think I look back and I see a different world to what we have now. And when I keep referencing Polly because she was such a landmark for me, but every available weekend I was at the stables. And I call it, a phrase I use a lot now is earning your stripes. I use it to my students, my colleagues. We've got to earn our stripes. And that really resonates on me. I don't ever want to be handed anything. I want to earn it. And so when Polly emerged as this, figure of like, oh, wow, you're amazing, even though I fell off the first time. As I say, every weekend, every school holiday, every half term, I was living, breathing horses. And I don't know if that's the same now as
Your
much.
childhood sounds, well, certainly the horse part of it sounds exactly like mine. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? That was exactly the same as me.
Yeah. And I hope we don't have children. I hope it is like that for children because it gave so much comfort, learnings, life experiences. You get there at 8 a.m. and you finish at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
and you're playing with the ponies, you're riding in the lake, you're doing the stables. But the key bit is what I didn't know then that I realize now is you're learning to be around horses.
Yeah.
And you're looking at their body language, their posture. Like I say, at the time, I didn't know any of that, but I reflect back on it, and I feel those lessons, those groundings, have given me, as a horse person now, that relationship I have with horses in my adulthood.
100%. It is literally time spent around them, understanding how they move, the different places that you might be vulnerable because you find out the hard way. And, it's also, it develops a work ethic doing 13, 14-hour days.
It does, and that's what I mean about those learnings. And I'm a workaholic. I love working. I get up at 5:30 and I will keep going till late. I love it, and I'm sure it comes back to those days where it was pouring with rain, and I got dropped off at the gate of the riding school, and off we went. No questions. And it wasn't a problem. I don't recall back like, oh, this is hard work.
No,
it's just
never.
like, off we go. Like, woohoo, come on, let's get charcoal out. Let's get Polly out. And you just did it.
Yeah.
And so definitely those values, those behaviors, I think installed a lot of good stuff that I brought forward into my they are, I'm going to change that. They are the foundations, if you want to say success. I don't like to use that word, but they're the foundations of any form of success people might think I've got or have. And I think it's invaluable that those experiences are invaluable.
I remember hearing someone talk about someone's child was into golf. And they asked one of the tour pros kind of, how often does he need to be practicing to make it as a pro sort of thing? Because they're showing a little bit of promise. And the pro is like, if you have to ask that question, he's not making it.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's like he would be out there, you would have to try and stop him from going out and
Yeah.
playing. And
Yeah.
it's that same idea, and it just becomes an
Yeah.
absolute obsession. So
Yeah.
you get Dancer,
Yeah.
and I'm assuming you're at this point at 14 or 15 sort of seeing a career in horses. That's where you want to go.
Yes. Well, I must just tell you about Dancer first, because
Okay.
this will perhaps give you an insight into my personality. So we go off. I've begged my family, please, please, please. So finally agreed to go and, yes, okay, we'll consider this. So we go off. I found, in the back of the magazines, you remember, you have all the adverts, and I find this beautiful horse and off we go. And this was in Luton. We drove all the way, and I got on, tried her, and again I fell off.
That's how you know it's a horse for you, isn't it?
I'm really perhaps not selling my riding skills. I promise you, I don't fall off anywhere near as much as I'm indicating. But the key bit was I got back up and got back on and rode around. And, like I said, my parents don't know anything about horses. And they're like, how is it, Russell? I was like, oh, it's amazing. And so Dancer comes home with us. And, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Dancer was an Anglo-Arab.
Oh, right, okay.
As a first horse. And, I can hear my now saying to then that person, like, you idiot, that would not be your first horse.
You'd be the type of person I'd be warning off.
Yeah, this is not suitable. But anyway, Dancer comes home, and boy, gosh, she taught me a lot of everything. So, I guess my moral there is, and this is definitely my thoughts, if you get knocked down, up you get, and find another way. And that's definitely something I've taken again through that resilience all the way through. Is I don't like the word no. And I will come on to that with another person who I worked with, which was the late Tim Stockdale, and his resilience. But anyway, to circle back to your question, I honestly don't know the answer. I don't. At 15, 16, we were doing, it would have been GCSE time, and I definitely didn't know the route. I didn't know the route I was taking now, put it like that. But I did know that I wanted to leave school at 16, because at that time you could. And I knew, and this, again, see how saying it all out loud makes me do sound quite a bit weird. I was looking, I used to get, as I say, these magazines, and as I got older, it became the Horse and Hound. And you will probably remember the Horse and Hound in that day. You used to get all the adverts at the back of it. You may still do. I don't get it now. And there was an advert in the back that had Warwickshire College, and it had a horse jumping a drop fence, an orange drop fence. It's called Laura's Leap because we live just down the road from it now. And it had the banner Warwickshire College under it, a white banner with green and orange logo. Well, I saw that repeatedly in the Horse and Hound, and that was it. I was like, I'm going to Warwickshire College. And I had never been there, never, I'm 16. I'm back in mainstream education, got my GCSEs thinking, right, I've got to get through this because I need to get the entries to go and work with horses. And I knew I wanted to study horses, and Warwickshire College was the place to go. So I presented this to my family, and they're like, you can't decide off an advert, Russell. And I was like, no, I'm going to Warwickshire College.
Yeah.
And anyway, I guess my family, I can see where my analytical scientific brain comes from, because they were like, no, we have to go to, try and look at different colleges. So off we go around the UK, trying various colleges, and I, all fours and against. And we drove down the drive of Warwickshire College. Christina Aguilera was playing Genie in a Bottle, pouring with rain. And I was like, hadn't even got out of the car. I said, this is it. This is where I've been visualizing for so many years, in the blooming Horse and Hound. And then that was it. So I knew I wanted to be with horses fairly early. I knew it was going to be Warwickshire College for some stupid reason. I don't know why. And I knew that meant I had to leave home at 16. And that's what I did. I left home at 16 because that was in Suffolk, and relocated on my own 3 hours away in Warwickshire to Warwickshire College to start my journey, I guess.
Good on you. So was it I'll just actually come back. I think
Yeah.
there's a big thing in following your gut, certainly in my life.
Mm.
It's like I'm not really impulsive, but when something sits right, it's very hard to change my mind. That's kind of what I'm going to do. And it doesn't need to make perfect sense. It's like, that's the thing. So I tend to follow that feeling as well.
Yeah.
So what did you study then?
I totally, I studied, so I did my first of all, I started off with my national diploma in equine studies, which was a 2-year course, because I knew my experiences of education, as I've already said, were not the best. So I knew I wanted to be with horses. And when I learned that there was an option to do equivalent of A levels with horses, I was like, that's it. Sign me up. And so I did my national diploma in equine studies. And that was my first part at Warwickshire College. Yeah.
Cool. And so you do your A level, so presumably you finish your course in around 18.
Yeah.
And then was it straight into academia, or did you go and do something else for a little while?
No, it was, yeah. So I did the 2 years at Warwickshire College, so that took us to 18. And again, as soon as I got to Warwickshire College, and the the academic side became horse related, it was like a massive light bulb a room had opened in my mind. A light bulb, the room was so bright, I was like, wow, this all makes sense. I don't want to be arrogant, but I was excelling beyond my own imagination, because I'd gone through, like I say, education, being, told, oh, you're this, you're that, you're struggling, you're not going to get this, you're not going to do that. And that's the best way to get something out of me, is say you're not going to do it, because I'm jolly well going to show you I can. And so I went into the college, and to the point where, like, oh, maybe, well, let's just see. And anyway, within the first few weeks, I was like, this is making sense. I'm understanding, I'm articulating, I'm growing in confidence. And then I was like, right, this is my career, is definitely horses. At the time, I think it's probably, we all dream of being a rider.
Yeah.
And I think probably at the time I was like, yeah, I'm jumping well, because that's my background, jumping. Yeah, maybe I could go into that. And as part of that course, the national diploma, we had to, I shouldn't use that word. It was part of the course to do a industrial work experience, a placement. And it was a year long, I think it was no, it wasn't. It was a summer placement. Anyway, I did that, and I worked for Tim Stockdale, show jumping. And again, that just exposed me to a whole new world. I was like, this is definitely where I want to get to. So then I came back for the final year, and that was great. And I then knew, to get where I want to get to, I've got to do my degree. And at the time, because I was still thinking, oh, science degree. Ooh.
So can I just pause there a second? So to get to where you wanted to get to, what was that at this point? Where did you want to get to?
I knew when I was doing my 2 years that I wanted to be with horses, definitely. And I knew, well, let me circle back again, because I then went jumping in Germany, and I guess that was probably a pivotal moment. I was jumping in Germany, and it was all going, well. And my father said, right, there's an option here. You carry on riding, or you go back to the UK. So this was in the summer. You go back to the UK and carry on, start your degree. So there probably was that was probably the first time I had to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I so desperately wanted to do the riding, but for some unknown reason to me, I was fairly sensible at that time and realized that to do the riding successfully, you've got to have multiple horses
Mm-hmm.
and financially, of course. And for some reason, it always stays with me. I kept thinking, what if it goes wrong? What's your backup plan? And I don't know why I had that, because no one ever really said that to me, but I definitely felt, what is my backup plan? So to answer your question, at that point, I knew I had to get a degree of some sort as
Okay.
a backup plan. Does
But
that
still
make?
with the idea of kind of maybe focusing on the riding as a
Yeah,
primary, and then yeah.
definitely, definitely. My riding was my guide at that point, definitely. Um, so then I came back to the UK and started my degree, which was in equine and human sports science.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big step for me, because at the time it was very much riding. And then another room opened up in my mind, like, oh, you can study this.
Yeah.
It's not just riding, you can study movement, and like, wow. And you can study heart rate and physiology. And I was like blown away by it. And so then it was like, and I was really tuned into all of the lectures and understanding. And so I was like, God, why did this not get taught when I was at school? Um,
So
and
your
so
your interest in the biomechanics side of things came from simply being exposed to it.
Well, it did, but then I circled back to when I was a child, and I was fascinated. I mentioned that I used to cycle my bicycle around our drive, and I used to be fascinated with how the bike worked and how the wheels turned. And I fondly remember and it's bizarre, isn't it? But like trotting my dogs around and just looking at how their legs were working. So I've always been
Okay.
fascinated with movement
Yeah.
and how it works and how horses move, I guess. But I definitely, in my first part of my career, I was very much, I'm going to do riding. I'm riding, 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 jumping. And let's say when I then came to the science element, the degree, as it opened up a completely new world of, we study movement in horses. Like, it's actually a thing. I thought it was just in
Yeah.
my
Okay.
head that I was interested in this.
Oh, that's
Um,
great. It's nice to know that there was that natural kind of affinity to the movement side of
mm,
things, because um that makes sense. When you look at your kind of rap sheet and kind of what
mm,
you've achieved, you don't get there, you don't get that kind of list without absolutely loving what you do, by being
yeah,
obsessed with it. Because then it's not like, it's not work to you in that sense, is it?
exactly.
It's just, it's following a
Hundred,
passion.
100%. And people say to me, do you enjoy doing what you do? And I say, enjoy. Like, I love it. It doesn't
Yeah.
even feature as the word enjoy. It's just, yeah. But it's bizarre how it's bizarre. I don't know if it's bizarre or exciting, but those things you have when you're a child, how they do come through later in life. And I guess I found my area, which was absolutely horses all the way back from Polly.
Yeah.
And then along the way, certain things have exposed me and brought out those things that were just innate, natural to me, what I enjoyed when I was younger. And I guess people say as soon as you apply yourself or find something you can apply yourself, you fly. And that's what I tell people all the time is, if like, for example, my students, if when they're thinking about doing a PhD and I say, do you love it? And they're like, well, I'm like, stop,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. And it's a bit like your golf analogy. I go to bed with a post-it note. I live it. I sleep with research. I think about it. I've been for a run this morning and I was pondering my papers. It is just non-stop. And that non-stop in my mind has something that's been forever, non-stop with my family. I want to go to the stables. Let's go to the stables. I really want a horse. And I guess it's just
Yeah.
how you think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think you're well, us both, because I think much the same way. It's a privilege to know what you want to spend your life doing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
Definitely.
obviously your expertise is in biomechanics, and then also in how the tack affects the horse and how the rider on the tack affects the horse. So you're kind of looking at the whole picture in movement. So for me, I kind of got into the horsemanship thing and learned a lot about how horses think and how they learn. And as time's gone on and my experience has grown and I've worked with lots of different horses, I've noticed that how horses think is as much about how they move. They kind of are how they move. So if they're like nice and loose with them, like no tension, and they're balanced, then they're very relaxed and they're happy and they're responsive. And on the opposite side of that coin, if they're tense or they're blocked and they're choppy, then that's how they are mentally. And I find that, okay, you definitely need to work with the horse's mind to help unlock the body a little bit. But if you actually focus on how the horse is moving, then that's a huge part of improving behavioral issues. And so my kind of understanding of how horses move has been fairly organic and experience based. And what I would really like to kind of understand a little bit better is being able to look at a horse move naturally, no rider, maybe on the lunge or whatever, and have a better idea of how to assess that horse in what it needs. Because I can tell if a horse is kind of going around a circle and its nose is poked to the outside and the shoulder's falling in, that it needs to lift that shoulder and bend to the inside. That much is obvious.
Yeah.
But it's what's causing that and where is the easiest place to start for the horse. So I'd like to propose a scenario to you.
Okay.
And then if you could walk me through how you kind of think about that. And
okay.
So let's say you get a 6 or 7 year old horse. Doesn't have any major behavioral issues, but it's stiff, uneven, falling in one direction and out the other. So I would like to hear your sort of thought process from first seeing that horse and then seeing how you would separate weakness, natural asymmetry, discomfort, and then we can get on to how that might work with rider influence and its history and saddle fit.
Okay, I had to write that down because there's quite a bit there to scenario to unpick. So 7-year-old, no behavioural issues, but just a bit stiff, falling in. Okay, yeah. Well, I think the first thing to do is actually look at the horse just standing. I think that's just standing on square or however the horse wishes to stand, and just assess. One of the things I teach people is just take time. And what I mean by that is stand the horses square and just take your time to go round them, look at them. How does the horse stand? How does he shift his weight from one limb to the other, just standing? And then start to look at the muscle development of the horse. And does for example, does the horse have overdevelopment of the under muscles of the neck versus the upper muscles, the dorsal muscles? How does the horse stand how is the horse's spinal posture? Is it extended, dropped in his back? Is he rounded? And just, I think that gives you lots of information, first of all, as to the horse's physical status, musculoskeletal status. And, quite simply, practically, does the horse look comfortable? Is the horse organized in a way that is functionally desirable?
Yeah.
And I clarify that with, if your horse has an overdevelopment of the underside of the neck and an extension of the spine, and the hind legs are pushed out behind, then you can start to map or semi-predict, although we don't want necessarily to bias your judgment, predict how that horse is going to move in a straight line and, of course, on a circle.
Like a giraffe.
In essence, yes.
Yeah.
That would be my, extreme analogy, yes. And then you have to think, okay, well, why is that happening? Is that conformational? Is that training? Is that management? Is it from a physical perspective for the horse that there is restriction or injury, dysfunction causing that? And I do encourage people just to take a step back and just look at those areas. That would be my first go-to. Of course, if we have the handler there, then you can ask all the questions that are relevant to what they do with the horse, how the horse has been going, how, we know the age of the horse, any previous history, all that's so important. So I think my first key bit is capture your information. From the handler, and of course just observing the horse. And one thing we haven't mentioned is the horse's facial expressions, in just standing. How's the horse's eye, the ear position? Does the horse have a tense face, a relaxed face? And I have to be honest, this isn't necessarily my specific area. I'm very much biomechanical. But I think we're knowing a lot more now, and there's tools out there that allow people to use those methods and just to get an impression of where the horse is at. I do think, circling back to what we both said about our childhoods and being around those horses, you get a feel. I'd like to think we get a feel if this horse looks comfortable or doesn't.
Just on that point, so I had a conversation not very long ago kind of about this topic, and this was from a person who got into horses a little bit later in life, first time horse owner and everything like that there. And actually their lack of exposure to maybe less desirable horse practices that a lot of us would have seen and still do see, means they can read the horse better than others, in the sense of, as you say about reading the horse's facial expression. You don't need to be horsey to read a horse's facial expression. In the same way that you don't need to have dogs to be able to read a dog's facial expression. It doesn't take a genius, does it, to tell whether a horse is relaxed or tensed. We can just tell. And it's one of those things that I think has been ignored in sacrifice to performance, because certainly, like, looking back now, and I think some of the things maybe I would have seen when I was younger, and maybe different yards and stuff I was on, things that were acceptable, and the horse is fine, and no, don't worry about it, he's fine, sort of thing. And yet the face is kind of screaming tension and discomfort and everything. And I think it's very easy to be involved with horses for a long time and think that those expressions are normal and can be ignored. So I like that you brought up the facial expression element, because I think if we actually just stood back and looked at it objectively, we'd be able to tell, is that horse actually happy or not, just by looking at those things.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with most of what you said there, and I think the key bit for me there is the standing back and asking the question. And I don't think that has been done so widely, and I don't necessarily. In some ways, I think it was perhaps done more previously in previous times. then we have much busier lives now. And I see it with people that, horse owners, and not to stereotype, but they've had a busy day at work. They drive into the stables, they tack their horse up in the arena within 5 minutes, and the horse is working back in the stable 45 minutes later, and they've gone and out, 5 minutes later. That would never, ever, ever have been in my experience, has been acceptable, because there was a process. For example, grooming. How many people groom horses? How it was done? How it used to be done? From my experiences.
Were you curry comb, dandy brush, body brush?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally.
There was an order to it, and to this day, I can't mess up the order.
Absolutely. And the curry comb, used to scrape my arm, and so yes, and that's what I mean about those skills that I think actually are lost now. And I do agree with you that you don't necessarily need the experience to recognize that that horse doesn't look comfortable. That horse looks comfortable. But I think then you can take it another level forward and say, what's comfortable? What's happy, what's unhappy. And I think you start to get very specific. But I think a global, this horse looks comfortable, this horse doesn't. I think you're absolutely right. You don't necessarily need to have experience to see, I think you don't need to have experience. And we know that from all of the things that, make it into the press or social media, and people are definitely becoming more aware of that.
Yeah.
But the skills, the innate skills I'm describing are, when you brush the horse, how does the horse respond to that brush? Does the horse stiffen? Does he drop his back? That's the bit that I think we need to do more of, is feeling your horses, taking the time and being sensitive to their responses. So yes,
I think that what you talk about the grooming as well, it's just that little bit of time, and if you do it religiously, you see the change. You see if something's changed. The horse does let you know. So it is 100%. You need to.
You see. For me, you become more bonding with the animal, the horse, which is just, back to Polly. That was amazing for me. But it gives you something that you can't really get if you don't do it. And that is assessing the horse's response.
Yeah.
And that, from a welfare perspective, I think is invaluable, because, with my own horses, I'm a nightmare. Like, oh, that's different today. Let's keep an eye on that. Oh, that's back to normal tomorrow. But let's say it's not. That could be your indicator of a movement asymmetry, a tension, a dysfunction occurring that you could actually help manage by early detection. So I think time. So circling back to your point, standing back, looking at the horse globally and then specifically, and then observing the horse and feeling the horse, I just think are invaluable skills to have, that I encourage everyone to really improve on. Just give you another example. When I was doing my training years ago, I was told by a very, very skilled person, said, get a piece of your hair. And so I pulled a piece of my hair out. I said, now put it under a piece of paper. And I was like, God, this is crazy. And she said, can you feel that hair? And I said, no. She said, you need to. That's how sensitive your touch needs to become. And so I worked on that for years, just keep, and even to this day, I sometimes just, I can still feel that. And that's the sort of specificity I think we've got to keep pushing forward to, so we can understand the horses. And I'm not sure where I'm going with any of that now. So
no, I understand what you mean. Yeah, it's perfect. So you've had a look at the horse.
Oh yeah, back to the 7-year-old. That's it. So we've had a look at the horse standing, and of course then the next step is to look at the horse moving, so straight line, walk, trot. And I'm going to give you 2 lenses in which I would do this. So I'm going to give you my practical lens, which is from a coaching perspective. and looking at just the horse's movement pattern in walk and trot, how the horse's limbs are swinging, moving, are they moving in, out, and of course looking at how the horse is tracking up, over tracking, etc. And again, I think just taking a step back, does the horse look, I hate to use this word, but comfortable trotting?
Mm-hmm.
Does he look relaxed? Is the horse moving through the whole body? Or going back to the giraffe analogy, is the horse traveling with an elevated head and neck and extended back? All of that would give me information and start to form a picture that the static assessment matches my dynamic assessment. So that would be from a coaching perspective.
Yeah.
Now, from my professional perspective, we are very lucky with the measuring systems we have. So we have the opportunity to measure the horse's symmetry by putting sensors on the horse and looking at how the horse is moving between the left and right sides of his body. And with the advance of technology, we're able to now use our smartphones. And before your listeners go and download this app, it's not available to horse owners. It's only to vets and researchers and professionals that can actually measure the horse's symmetry patterns from your smartphone with AI technology. So
No way.
it's moving forward at pace, and I think it's exciting and for the betterment of the horse. So what we would say in research is we can objectively assess the horse's movement pattern, identifying asymmetries between left and right. But I think one of the key things that's important to really mention is I am 100% academic, as you have seen and we've discussed, but I'm always thinking about this from an applied perspective.
Yeah.
So it's all very well having these data that says the horse is moving like this, but you still have to circle back and look at the horse. And that's so important. And, in our research group, something we're always really discussing and putting absolutely at the front is we've got our measuring systems, but what about the individual horse? And so I would actually combine the two approaches, the practical approach of assessing the horse dynamically, walk, trot, straight line, hard surface, how the horse is moving, combined with the objective data is just gold standard. But I think it's so important that we keep training people to watch their horses.
To have the eye, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can simplify this even further, and just videoing is really useful, but it doesn't replace the eye. Yeah.
So I'd be interested to know maybe some of the most common things you would see in terms of, don't want to use the word dysfunction, but what's a common problem you would come across when a horse is trotting up generally?
Well, yeah.
Walking up.
So we use the trot. What we tend to see is that the right hind has more asymmetry for one reason or another. And then that may present that the horse is a bit more crooked, so the quarters track to one side when trotting in hand. But if you were to ask me, out of the thousands of horses we've studied, I would say there's a bias towards a right hind asymmetry over the left. Now, why that is an area that I've personally been interested in, and that brings us into our laterality world, where we have collaborated with researchers and studied, do horses have laterality, or is it just asymmetry?
Can you define what laterality is?
Good question. So laterality is the horse's innate biological preference to use the left side, right side of its body. So I'm right-handed, so that's a preference, a sidedness, a bias could
Okay,
come
yeah.
under this term laterality. But what we believe is, and it's a really hard area to study in the horses, what we believe from the work we've done and summation of others is laterality really equates to a very small percentage. And actually, in the absence of not knowing its true origins, i.e., motor, the brain, that we should probably just treat it as asymmetry and support the horse.
So when you say laterality, you mean the horse is one-sided. That's what that would mean in
Well,
practice.
could be, but the question is where does it come from?
Okay. So yeah, it's just interesting that it tends to be the right hind that's asymmetric as well, because there's definitely a difference, when you work with a lot of young horses and stuff like that, in defensiveness in the right and left side.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those chicken and eggs. Do we do everything on the left because the horse is naturally quieter on the left side? Or is the horse quieter on the left side because we do everything on the left?
Yeah. I think let me just give you some other, because the right hind's just one area. But what we have found, or what's been shown in the literature, is if you put young horses in a lunge pen and watch them travel on the left and right circles, on the left rein, they'll hug the outside track, but on the right rein, they'll take diagonal lines. So we could equate that to falling in, possibly.
Okay.
And in another study,
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and in another study, we found that horses were falling more to one side than the other, right? And then, so there's lots of themes or findings that are being reported in the various studies. Now, are they truly laterality, or are they the manifestation of laterality that's led to asymmetry? Is it a preference? We don't know. The other one is grazing behavior, that horse foals at a young age have a preference to protract one limb forward and retract the other limb. And in doing that, they lower themselves, the head and neck, so then they can graze. So grazing behavior. And that preference has been shown to be maintained into older horses. And then as a result of that, there is a risk that the hooves become asymmetric. So you get a flatter foot and a more upright foot.
Yeah, it makes sense. Because I suppose they spend an awful lot of time with their heads down if they've got plenty of turn it. Yeah.
But that preference occurs after 20 weeks. So the question is that a behavior? Is that an acquired behavior, preference? Or was there something that said to the foal, you got to put the left foot forward, hoof forward? And that's where the tricky bit comes. Is it truly lateralized, or is it a learned response or a preference of sidedness?
I think the learned response thing you're saying is probably one of the trickiest things about studying horses scientifically, because there is no two the same.
Yeah.
In terms of what experience they've had, and it's very hard to judge them totally. You can't not take into account the experience of that horse when you're studying anything about them. And I think that it makes a very difficult subject to study.
Exactly. And that's why, I cautiously describe what laterality is, because we don't truly know where it originates from a motor perspective. And what causes the horse to do that, don't know. The asymmetric feet we would tend to see in horses that do have asymmetric front hooves, the left being flatter, the right being more upright. And then that has an effect on scapular position. But is that as a result of movement pattern? Is that a result of dysfunction? Is that an adaptation, or was the horse born with that? And these are just all the questions that we don't know. And I think probably what I want to say is that I think horse owners, coaches, professionals, we need to be mindful of just saying it's laterality and the horse has always done that. Because I think that is a danger of preventing people to support the horse.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if we were particularly different on one side, then there's exercises and strength work we could do to help balance ourselves out, which would ultimately benefit us, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's the really important part. For example, I hear it all the time. Horses go better on one rein than the other. Well, he's always done that, so that's fine. But that could be because there's an orthopedic issue.
Yeah.
And and that's where I think we've got to be very careful that we don't just use the word laterality as an umbrella of, well,
I
it's
can
just
promise
one
you,
side.
I've never used that word before, so I don't think there's any
Yeah,
danger of me bringing.
no, not you. But I do hear that quite a bit
Yeah.
in my coaching world. Well, he's just right-handed or left-handed. Well, it could be that there are other factors involved here, and they need investigating and exploring, and more equally important, supporting.
Okay, yeah.
That's
So
important.
I would love to let's just run with the idea that this horse is
Yes, back to the 7-year-old.
right hind asymmetric. So
Yeah.
does that mean their hip is slightly to the right or to the
So
left?
right hind asymmetry, and how I quantify that is that there's an asymmetry in the weight bearing part of the stride and the push off part of the stride. So right hind's not loading as much as the left. And I think what I must just say is that how I'm talking here is just looking at the up down movement of the horse. What you're indicating there is the rotations. So let's just summarize that the horse is putting the right hind to the right of the midline, so quarters to the right, and there is a obvious right hind asymmetry with the right hip, a tubercoxy movement.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what's the next bit of the assessment then?
Well, in that situation, for me, this is where it's so important to be working as a team. And you need to bring in your vet to, first of all, to understand what that asymmetry is, because as I've presented it there, it could be a lameness. So that is the first thing you have to assess, or they have to assess clinically. Is this horse sound? Is this lameness? And then working closely with your other team members, i.e. your physio, your therapist, you would again assess this horse and see where is this movement pattern coming from.
Okay.
And whilst we talk about the right hind, it's really important that we're actually taking a global approach, because if you've got asymmetry somewhere, let's say right hind, then there's compensation elsewhere. There's just the way of biology. You injure your left leg, you shift your weight to the right leg, that develops a compensation strategy. The horses have 4 legs, 4 limbs, and 4 options to compensate, as well as their back. So, I really, that scenario I've described there is how we would manage our horses when they came here, is we'd assess them, and then we would certainly be bringing in our home team.
Yes.
And people say, oh, well, that's only high level horses. Well, no. And I challenge that, because everyone has a vet, everyone has a physio and a farrier, or majority of people do. And to me, it's about communicating. So, for example, in that situation, I would video the horse and send it to your vet and physio and farrier and say, look, the horse has just arrived. Could we arrange a visit just so we can make sure we're all aligned? I've identified, I think there's a right hind asymmetry weakness. I just want to give the horse an MOT. And for me, that would start with the vet and then supporting to the other members.
Okay, brilliant. So let's say there's nothing alarming that says there's an issue causing this right hind symmetry. That's just the way the horse has either learned to move over time. How would you then, let's say you put that horse on a lunge, does right hind symmetry mean that it's likely to fall in on the right side or fall in on the left or vice versa?
Well, this is a very good question, because the minute you put a horse on a circle, it alters the biomechanics. And if you think about this practically, the inside legs go on a smaller circle than the outside legs. And we've all seen horses on the lunge. What they do is they lean in to be able to generate the forces to be able to turn on a circle. And then what horses will do is they will put their heads to the outside, to the inside. Some will put them up. And so to answer your question, the right hind, it really is variable. It may mean that they can fall in. It may mean they can fall out. What I think it will mean is that there'll be a difference in movement patterns between the left and right circles. So if you just forget falling in, falling out for a moment, just looking at the swing phase, the flight arc of the right hind is likely to vary when it's on the inside of a circle versus the outside of a circle. And things you may see are an obvious toe drag of that right hind and indeed the left hind. And the other things you may see is, because when that hind limb's on the inside outside, you may see the horse speeding up, slowing down, and again altering his posture to accommodate this dysfunction or asymmetry or weakness, however it's been described. So I think it's important to evaluate the horse on both the left, right rein or right circles, seeing if the horse falls in, falls out. Could be laterality, asymmetry, maybe neither. But more importantly, looking at the movement patterns of the horse on both the left and right.
So just for the purpose of example, let's say, okay, maybe a little bit kind of not exactly straight on the left rein, but let's say the right rein is more extreme in terms of nose to the outside, falling in, maybe rushing a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you attempt, let's say you've got this horse then to school on for the next 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you then attempt to help fix the shape on the lunge by maybe encouraging the horse to lift the shoulder and create more space for the hind end to step under? Or where do you start in terms of strengthening that?
Okay. Yeah. Good question. So just to set my own context, we're going to assume this horse is clinically sound.
Yeah.
And has been assessed. We're all happy, but we see this movement pattern on the lunge. So I have to be honest, I'm not a big fan of lunging.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that the horse is lunging done well, I think, has a place. Lunging done incorrectly, I think, could be dangerous. So I'd probably go back a step and actually do some more in-hand work with this horse as my starting point.
Okay. And what do you mean by in-hand then?
Yeah, so in-hand work, so beside the horse's head, straight lines, and doing, exercises that help improve the horse's posture. Because the horse is falling to the right, head to the left, could just be that the horse doesn't have the capacity to maintain the circle that you described on the right. So going back a step, improving the horse's posture, rein back exercises, bending exercises, and even going back a step further to stable exercises or field exercises. I'm a big, big fan with my own horses. Like, my own horses have a gym program that they go through every day.
That does not surprise me.
And it's an evidence-based gym program that's been prescribed by our professionals. And it has the basis of, it starts in the stable, and they do carrot exercises where they're bending to the left, to the right. And people say, oh, it's a carrot exercise. But those exercises have been shown to increase the cross-sectional area of the multifidus muscle. And that is a muscle that can help stabilize the spine, the vertebral column. And with that,
Where is that muscle? Sorry.
So if you think of your spine, your dorsal spinous processes, it runs along there, the spine, and crosses 3, 4, 5 vertebral bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key things with that muscle is it's what's called anticipatory. And it is detecting, movement patterns before they occur. So it prepares the muscle for movement before the movement happens. So it's anticipating that. So those exercises help with the cross-sectional area of that. So in doing that, you're then helping to stabilize the back. And with that, you're helping to make it anticipate movement that's going to be occurring. So that's great. So it could be, going back to our horse that's falling to the right, that the posture is, the horse is weak. So actually we need to improve the horse's posture. So doing stable exercises and then moving on to the in-hand work in the arena. As I said a moment ago, rein back, sideways movements, I think are brilliant.
Yeah.
And then I would be very keen to get the horse walking over poles. So a line of poles, just ground poles to start with, and looking at how the horse negotiates those. And the research that my colleagues are working on, or we're working on, but led by my colleague, is looking at the use of pole work exercise in management and rehabilitation. And one of the things that we're finding is that you need to have the poles fairly short, if to limit the amount of extension in the horses. So they would be using pole work exercise. That was just one example of the pole works, but using pole work exercise would be where I would include in my gym program for this particular horse. So to summarize, I would come off the lunge, work in a straight line, work in hand, and work with exercises that improve the horse's posture before I perhaps would negotiate the lunge.
Okay. And during this time, would you be riding the horse at all, or would it be just groundwork for a little bit?
Well, that's a good question. So yes, I would be riding the horse, and I would be doing some very specific exercises to improve the horse's general way of going. You talk about the right shoulder dropping down, so some exercises to encourage that movement pattern to keep the shoulder up. Yes, and I suppose I'm slightly cautious there in I think rider skill is an important consideration here. I'd like to think I'm a skilled rider that rides in balance with my horses and can influence them in a positive way.
Okay. So let's talk. This is your project. You're the rider, and so you don't need to worry about rider skill. So when you're riding and you're talking about exercises that might lift that shoulder, are you talking like counterbending? Are you talking like a little bit of leg yield? What sort of thing are you talking about?
So quite honestly, I'm a big fan of leg yield. I think it's very useful with counterflexion off to and from the track, depending what you're working on. I like the leg yield in walk. My favorite exercise is a staircase where you leg yield for 2 strides, ride straight for 2 strides, leg yield for 2 strides. Yeah. Why? Because then you're really checking you've got reactions to both sides of the horse, the left and the right side.
And you're encouraging that hindquarter to keep up with the shoulder as well and go
absolutely.
straight.
And the thing is, the key bit here is the specificity of your leg yield. If you're just leg yielding and the shoulders are falling and the quarters are trailing, that's not biomechanically going to be beneficial to the horse.
Yeah.
Likewise, if you've achieved alignment but you're leg yielding and the horse is just like, I've got this, I'm falling, let's just do this, then you're not developing those stabilizing muscles. So I really like leg yield correctly, and then straight to check you've got the alignment of the horse, and then go again. And that's I find really useful. The other one I like is so leg yield, walk, trot, and actually I do it in canter too when the horse has the capacity. I really like that. The other one I do all the time with my horses is serpentines, and how many people do serpentines? Sometimes not many. And
it's
not
such a good balancing exercise, isn't it? And they learn to recognize the pattern and start to balance themselves.
They do.
It's really good, yeah.
But importantly, the riders learn to ride with their legs and seat and not the inside rein.
Yeah.
And I don't just do a 3-loop serpentine. I do about a 6 or 7-loop serpentine.
Okay.
Where
really
it goes
busy.
back on itself. So you come across the school and go back up the arena into a loop and then come back across the school. And that I find, if the horse has capacity, and this horse that you're describing, I feel does. So I'm working both sides of the horse. I'm bending the horse through the body, and mobilizing the horse and helping to strengthen the horse. I think one thing, we're talking about dropping the right side. Yes, that's our focus, but actually, I suppose generally I would focus more 50-50 both reins, because it may be that working on the other rein doing the exercise helps the shoulder. So
you wouldn't overload one side because that's the weaker side. You would continue to work 50-50.
I personally would, with attention of that side you're trying to influence. Yes, I just get a little worried with people when they, it's the right side that's weaker, and you see them 80% on the right, and then all of a sudden you've got another problem emerging. And so, yes, and the other thing I do use is my position. So, rising trot on the correct, incorrect diagonals. I quite often will do that to purposely load one diagonal pair differently to the other.
Oh, so you'll ride on the wrong diagonal?
Yeah,
purposely?
just on a straight line, just to see what the horse is feeling.
I'm not sure I could watch that.
Yeah, it's a really nice exercise to do, because you see how the horse responds to the change in rider. And for your listeners, it's important that you're riding on the correct diagonal.
Okay, good.
and not just so just to be clear, I use the incorrect diagonal to assess the horse and change it for the circles. Quite often horses will put you on their preferred diagonal, which is a disaster for the horse, because the riders just carry on and then they're strengthening one diagonal pair versus the other, and then you've got a whole cycle of merging.
So actually, just to get a little bit technical about the trot diagonal then, so is the horse more affected by the rise or the sit when you're trotting?
Good question. So studies have shown that as the rider is actively rising up, they counteract the movement, the push off of the horse. And that can actually mimic a hind limb asymmetry, a lameness. So it's the sitting and the rising phase of that diagonal pair that is when the back is loaded, and of course then the rider is loading the saddle and, as I say, the back. As the rider is rising, that would be the easier diagonal pair for that horse, and that's why it's important, or why I do use changing the diagonal to see how does that horse respond when, in effect, the back is loaded and that diagonal pair is loaded. And from a rehabilitation perspective, if you're trying to load, let's say, the right hind left fore diagonal pair, it may be that you go on the horse's preferred easier rein, and for those that can't see me, I'm doing air quotes, and you may ride on the wrong diagonal for a short period, like 5-10 strides, and change back to help strengthen that specific diagonal pair. So using your position, I think is invaluable. And in the context that you're describing, it may be that I can keep the right shoulder up more when I'm sitting. So then I may use sitting trot a bit more. So I think it's responding with your body, your position, and the movements to influence the horse. But yeah, rising trot is not something it's not just rising trot. There's a lot of, from a biomechanical perspective, you can influence the horse considerably.
Well, yeah, I'm quite interested in that because it's the same. So I did a lot of breaking in and starting horses, and especially when you're first starting canter with a young horse, some horses move in such a way that it makes it inviting for you to stand up off their back and let them move underneath you. And other horses canter in a way that it almost makes it impossible for you to get up off their back. So it's like they invite you to do one or the other.
Yeah.
And I've often kind of wondered, if you can move in balance with the horse, surely whether you're standing or sitting and the load that puts on the saddle is irrelevant, because the weight is the same, the overall load is the same regardless.
Yes, yes, and no. I think the key point to draw out there is the balance. If you're riding in balance with the horse, and we call that in phase or coupled with the horse, you can then in effect bounce together.
Yeah.
And that is really useful. And as you described, the load is on the back, you're bouncing as one. So that is useful. The saddle pressure data let's use trot, has not to get too technical, but trot has two phases to the stride, a left and a right, as we've just mentioned. And in your saddle pressures, you get two peaks, and those peaks of pressure are symmetrical because the rider is seated. In your rising trot, your peaks are asymmetrical. So you have a high peak for the seated phase and a low peak for the standing phase when the back is unloaded. So yes, the weight, what we do with our position, the weight is on the back, but the distribution of that pressure can be asymmetrical, i.e. rising trot. And to pick up on your point about the light seat, I think it's invaluable, the light seat, the 2-point position. And from a pressure distribution, the peaks are more symmetrical and the amount of pressure is a little lower. So yes, you can influence, just being on the horse's back adds a load. And in trot, it's 2 times the rider's weight coming down on the horse's back every stride. In canter, it's 2.5 times. So that load has to be distributed somewhere. If you're riding in balance, it's distributed in a fairly even way. But the minute you lean to one side or you ride out of balance, you alter that distribution.
So let's say I'm 12 stone. In canter to that horse, I'm over 24 stone.
Well, yes, it is being reported that maximum pressures are 2.5 times. The key thing I must just illustrate here is that it is a dynamic system. You're going up and down, but the saddle pressures do indicate that, due to the other forces that are acting on the horse, the body, that the pressures do increase. Yes. And that's why
that's amazing when you think how.
Yeah, but this is why one of the things I think with horses is they like predictability and stability. They like to be able to predict the movement patterns of the rider. So if your rider, for example, 12 stone, and you're riding in balance with the horse can manage that, quite capable, more than capable of managing that. If you were to ride out of balance and become asynchronized with the horse and bouncing on the horse's back, well, your 12 stone has made that quite a lot harder for the horse.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to keep it in perspective, really reiterate that, really reiterating the importance of correct position, skill, and balance to try and stay as coupled with the horse as possible.
Yes.
And that is so important.
Well, I think that leads us really nicely into the rider biomechanics side of things. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was by a guy who specializes in rider fitness.
Yeah.
And he was making the point that riding is a sport that when you're in the saddle, it almost actively detrains your body because you're not loading the body. And so lessons, obviously improving your position in the saddle and everything is incredibly valuable, but really the work done out of the saddle to make yourself stronger and balanced in the right places and, helping your hip rotation and everything like that is probably going to be better for your riding. So I'd be interested to hear your point of view on that, because I know you deal with both on and off the saddle.
Yeah. I think it's important to differentiate between technical skills and physical skills. I'm not completely on board that the loading on, when you're riding, you're having to maintain trunk stability and be able to absorb huge forces that are coming up from the horse during locomotion.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you are seated, so you are in a weighted position. So I think there are elements from a riding perspective that do improve our fitness or physiological capacity for riding. But I do completely agree with the benefits of off-horse exercise. And I think you can improve. What we do with our riders is assess them off horse and work with them to improve their balance, as going back to our weight discussion, their proprioception, where their bodies are in space, because the horse is moving in, let's just say, trotting, bouncing up and down. The riders need to be able to know where their body is on the horse, i.e. leaning back, forwards to one side. And then there's the physical side of strength training to help improve the rider's stability. But one thing that I think is often overlooked is improving the rider's ability to absorb the movements of the horse. And I think that's something we don't do enough of. And if I just talk you through, like, for example, in canter, the horse's trunk pitches up and down, it rocks up and down, forwards and back. And the rider has to manage that and go with the movements of the horse. The pelvis has to follow the movements of the saddle temporarily, and the trunk has to respond. Well, if you have a rider that has dysfunction, let's say in the pelvis, or has a restricted pelvis, how does that pelvis then interact with the saddle in response to the movements of the horse?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think we could get better, is improving functional movement patterns off horse to then help present to the horse a rider that has a good awareness, good balance, and has the ability to manage the movements of the horse. And this is something that I'm quite interested in exploring further in our research, is if a rider, let's say, does have pelvic dysfunction, what is the strategy that they take to be able to canter, for example?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Is that why we see more asynchronized movement? Is that why we see riders more fixed in an anterior position or a posterior? And then what is the biomechanical effect that has on the horse? And I think that'd be an interesting one to unpick. But
so you don't have any answers for that yet?
Not from not specifically where we've got dysfunction in riders that and looked at the effect that has. But what I can say is, in a study we did where we made riders asymmetric, we shortened one stirrup by 5 centimeters. And what we found was, in that study, and this was an immediate study intervention, we found that the horse's limb loading, front limbs and hind limbs, was altered as a result. and we found that the horses altered their back movement with the asymmetrical rider. And the other interesting thing, and it shows when we did this study, because behavioral analysis wasn't so um, known about as it is now, is that the horses responded by swishing their tails. They altered their alignment. They put their quarters to one side. And then the riders responded to the asymmetry by using one rein to straighten the horses. So if we use that as our foundations, I know that rider asymmetry has a big effect on the horse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what we know from other studies where they have studied riders that collapse to one side, they put more pressure on the opposite side to the side they're collapsing. So if they collapse to the right, they put pressure on the left side of the saddle.
Uh-huh.
But if they lean to the right, they put pressure on the same side, that being the right. So we know rider asymmetry has an effect. What I don't think we know is the specificity that, as I described, if my pelvis is dysfunctional, what is the biomechanical effect in the rider? I think we can work that out, and we know that. But how does that what is the strategies that go between then the horse and the rider in that specific context of the pelvis? So going back to your question, I'm a big believer in off-horse exercise assessment for the riders to be able to improve rider strength. Training is important, but I think the ability to absorb the movements of the horse and of the horses equally as equally as important. Sorry.
Okay, that's great. And is there any even without sort of back research, is there any off-horse exercises you would recommend that might help improve that for people?
Well, obviously, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, I'm a Pilates instructor.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of Pilates-based exercises with riders. But I think for me personally, I think all riders should have a physio assessment that assesses their movement patterns. And from there prescribes an exercise plan that is specific for riders. And
Just
I
like
think
the horse.
you've got the link of how it works. How we work is very much trying to strengthen the horse and the rider out or off the riding scenario to then improve the riding scenario. But what I was just going to say there, going back to the exercise prescription, a lot of some exercises that are not necessarily rider specific focus on strength training. You've got to have a strong core.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That's open for debate. And you've got to have a really upright trunk. Have we? Open to debate. But what we really need is we must start with the pelvis, is pelvic function. What is the function of the pelvis? Let's improve that and then look at the remaining segments. And the other area that I encourage everyone to do is, or not to fall in the trap of, is just focusing on the pelvis. Don't do that either. You've got to take a whole picture. Just like when we stood our horse and took a holistic view, you've got to take a holistic view of the rider. And the reason I say that is foot biomechanics can influence pelvic movement. And that's been followed, makes sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That's been followed to the riding position. So riders that had a certain movement pattern had an association with foot biomechanics.
Yeah,
so
well, if you see a lot of riders and the toes are turned out, aren't they? Because
all of that.
Yeah.
All of that. And, I come back on, that's one pattern I really don't like to see, particularly if the rider has a spur on, because if the toes turned out, the spur is in.
Yeah.
And those sort of things can be, I think, addressed in a fast-tracked way off horse. And let's be really practical and honest about this. When people are being coached, you hear people say right shoulder, right shoulder. The rider is processing all of the information to stay on the horse, execute the movements that are being asked, influence the horse the best way they can, receive the information back from the horse, and then you've got this person saying right shoulder. What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah,
to
100%.
what
There's
does it
so
mean?
much going on,
Yeah.
and for you
So
to
I
try
think
and yeah,
so I think the way to fast track movement pattern retraining is to come off the horse and do real specific movement patterns exercises that then can translate on the horse.
and
And
so you offer that service to people, yeah,
well, I do. Yes, I do. From a Pilates perspective,
yeah,
I do. But I was just going to say that I'm a big, big, big fan. And if you follow me on social media, you see I travel around in it with it of a gym ball. You know, a lot of the work I do is on gym balls. Once I've got riders functionally where I want them standing and squatting and walking, I'll get them onto a gym ball. And the reason that is because it's an unstable surface.
hmm
And what is the horse's back? An unstable surface. And then we get bouncing on the gym ball. Why? Well, that starts to replicate a little bit the movements of what the trunk might do of the horse.
so a little bit of that pelvic absorption that you were talking about,
Exactly.
yeah,
So you start to look at, okay, so statically we've got better or functionally we've got better movement patterns in a standing position. What happens when we go in a seated position? Do we maintain that, or do you go back into that locked position?
yeah,
And we also have a saddle horse that then starts to get closer to the horse. But it really is trying to retrain a movement pattern. And for that, I think you need specificity and clarity for the individual, because
perfect,
there's so much happening on the arena that I find it quite hard for
yeah,
people and the key thing, like when we going back to what we offer, we do rider biomechanics sessions and we video riders and we do the corrections and you see an immediate difference. Great. And I always say to them, I say, tomorrow you're going to ride, you're going to try and do these corrections and your brain's going to go, that's weird. It feels weird. Crazy. Don't do it, because we have the movement pattern. We have that
yeah,
pathway, and it's about retraining that. And that only, I think, from my experience, only happens with real controlled, targeted interventions.
that's
Um,
great. So I
and
was going to ask you kind of to give us a little checklist of sitting straight on the horse in all three gaits, but I think you've kind of answered my question. Is you really you need to work on it off the horse.
Well, I think you need to assess it on the horse first.
Okay, yeah,
And there is one big area that we haven't discussed, and we might have to pick up on that another
yeah. I
time.
think we're getting a bit
Is
close for.
the saddle
Mm,
interface with the horse and the rider. And the reason I say that is quite, and this is a classic one for you. Your horse that has the shoulders going to the right, dropping to the right, falling to the left, will very likely could have saddle slip to the left
mhm.
and this will only appear on the right rein. And this is a saddle slip issue. And the research indicates that this is coming more from the horse being weaker, possibly left hind, or indeed, let's circle back. The studies have shown that saddle slips to the lame or lamer side. So let's say left is slipping left. It could be the left hind is affected. It could be asymmetry. It could be, as you described, the rib cage mechanics, or it could be a whole host of things. But what I tend to see is people will say it's the rider. And this is, I think, misleading and potentially delays the horse being looked at. So just coming back to what we were talking about riders, if you have a rider that has an asymmetry on one rein, you must consider what effect is the saddle having.
Okay,
If it's slipping off to one side, yes, address the rider, but also consider the horse and the saddle fit, because it is a very complex interaction between the three.
brilliant. So there is. I'm aware. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got another call coming up. But I did want to touch briefly on the subject. I know you're not a saddle fitter.
Yeah.
I know you would say quite specifically that that's not what you do.
Yeah.
But, and neither am I. So it's a subject I stay well clear of.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be an awful lot of contradictory advice from between saddle fitters. And I would love to just get a little short bit of advice that you might give to people in choosing a saddle fitter and knowing that they're going to be beneficial for you and your horse.
Mm. Oh, you should have put this question at the beginning.
I know. Well, I was, and I was kind of. It's a really difficult subject, but there are, like, the qualifications are there, but the advice can vary so widely.
So I think first of all, I have to stick to my principles, and qualifications are key. And that really is my North Star, is the individual qualified. And the reason I say that, and it seems obvious, but there are lots that are not. And so that's my starting point, is the individual qualified. And then I do a lot of work with the Society of Master Saddlers. I recognize there's other qualifications, but I do a lot of work with Society of Master Saddlers, saddle fitters. So that would be my first thing. My second thing is, do they have a range of saddles that you can try? And I just clarify that a little bit by those that sell individual saddles, one brand possibly are not qualified. They're more agents. Mm-hmm. Fine, but you need to be aware of that. So you need to be trying multiple saddles. I guess the other thing is personal experiences, and I think recommendations is probably something that's really useful for you to explore. And I'm probably going to get shot down for this, but if you have a saddle fitter come and they don't assess the horse ridden, qualified or not qualified, to me, that's enough to say, right, thank you very much, we're done. Because you cannot assess saddle fit in a stable. And there's the rare time that may have to be the case for whatever reason it might be. But you need to see the saddle ridden. They need to see the saddle dynamically for all the reasons we've been discussing here about movement patterns of the horse. So if my saddle fitter turned up and said saddle fit's fine and they only looked in the stable, that would be a no for me. So I guess I would be asking my potential saddle fitter, what is their process? What's their protocol? There is a standard protocol I can only speak from the SMS perspective, the code of conduct. And if they're violating that, then that gives me my answer of I need to find someone else.
And is that protocol available to download and to read so you can kind of be a little bit knowledgeable?
Good question. I'm going to signpost you to the do you know what? I don't know if that is publicly available, so I don't know.
That's fine.
But do have a look online and see for yourself. I'm not sure if it's a public document.
No, that's fine. I think it just helps to be armed, because when you're not knowledgeable and you're asking for the opinion of someone who is supposed to be, I think it's really important that you at least know how to find someone who is able to give you good advice.
100%. And I don't wish to keep referencing one group, but that is who I've done a lot of work with, so I'm more familiar with their work. But you can go on the Society of Master Saddlers website and have a look for members, and the equine fittings directory also lists the members of different other groups. So there are people you can go to, but still you've got to do your next stage because there's some people that don't see the horses ridden, and quite honestly, it's not acceptable. So, as I say, I would check out at that point.
Brilliant. Thanks. That's really great advice. So there's two things I want to ask every guest. I suppose the first one I want to ask you is, you'll have so much learning resources that it's, but if there's something for the lay person to go and read or watch, what would you recommend?
Well, obviously, I'd like to recommend ourselves.
Yep, perfect. You can do that.
Which is Centaur Biomechanics. And the reason for that is because I go back to what I said right at the very beginning. My passion as a researcher, academic, is to make the research translatable. So that would be what we spend a lot of time trying to get stuff out that makes sense and easy to understand. The other one source would be Dr. David Marlin, would be a source that presents lay scientific information in a lay way. And if you wanted a little bit more technical, the Veterinary Compendium is by Professor Kevin Hausler, is another source that I think is very nicely presented.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'll put those in the show notes so that people can find them. And then lastly, my question would be, if there was one thing you could change in the horse world, good or bad, what would that be?
Well, I think I'm going to stick to what Polly taught me, and it's time. I want people to have more time to look at the nuances, the detail in our horses, and ask the question, why? Why does that happen? Why does the horse do this? And then with that, explore that why, and not just go, well, he's always done that, or that's just the way it does it. I'm a big believer in horses are telling us all the time. We're just not listening. And I think we don't listen because time is short. And when we're in that sort of state, we're not in receive mode. And so I want people to have time to ask the why and to keep being curious to explore the why.
That's really good. I think the same goes for when you go to ride your horse as well. If you've got all the time in the world, 30 minutes will give you a lovely ride. If you've only got half an hour, it's going to be awful. So it's a great thing to stick to.
100%, and I'll take it a step further. If you've had a bad day at the office and you're time poor, go and do your gym program with your horse. Don't ride, because you'll have more benefit spending time doing other stuff than riding for a short period of time. I think have time, be curious, keep asking why.
Fantastic advice. So obviously, where is the best place for people to find you if they want more information or to work with you?
Well, Centaur Biomechanics, and then .co.uk, or follow us on social media. And that'd be it.
Right. Fantastic. Well, I know you've got another call to get to, so I'm going to stop the recording, but please just stay there. Don't hang up yet. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been fascinating. I feel like we could have talked for hours more.
Well, we could have done. I can't believe time has passed.
All right. Thanks, Russell.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.